Salvete omnes, this is Emilio, also known as the Martian Geek. It's time for another episode of the Bayonetta scale, and this time we are all the way up to level 9. I never say never, but this would require a minor miracle. This is about where the Let's Plays start turning into Let's Not Plays. I don't expect to ever play any of the games at this level unless the rating goes down later, not as a Let's Play and possibly not even on my own time. Generally, if a game is at this point, I just plain don't like it, or wouldn't expect to like it. At the same time, they don't quite reach that level of absolutely not no matter what that you get with level 10. It's a minor difference because the chances are pretty close to zero for both of them, but I'd say that these are at least more likely to drop lower if new knowledge or experience comes along, and they're less likely to produce the level of animosity that a 10 would. With all that in mind, some games that get this rating include Ghosts and Goblins. I admittedly don't have all that much experience with these, but what little I do have has been pretty bad. I played through part of the first level of the Super Nintendo one in order to rip some sprite graphics, and even that little bit was enough to give me a less than decent impression. In particular, the jump physics were terrible! Remember last time when I brought out how bad the physics in Castlevania were? This is the only game I've played where they're even worse than that. Some of their uses of the Super Nintendo hardware were neat, like the shape-changing ground in the first level. I looked at a video of the other levels and found that it does some neat Mode 7 things and such too. But what good are they if they're in a game that's not fun? And that's just the Super Nintendo one. From what I've heard, the original NES game is much, much worse. While I say original NES game, apparently it was an arcade game first, and that version wasn't quite as bad as the NES one, but the latter is probably what more people know. Ghosts and Goblins seems to be guilty of all the worst traits of 8-bit games. I've already talked about how horribly it controls. I can't imagine it has any sort of save or password system. You apparently, and medically, have to play the entire game through twice to get a proper ending, and it's not only ridiculously difficult, but often not even fair. Even Cody Kitty said that nobody likes Ghosts and Goblins, and she implied that she thinks people are wimps if they use the Konami code to get through the original Contra. Between the unforgiving physics, insane difficulty, and padding, this sounds like a miserable experience to play, and frankly I don't really need to play something like that when there are plenty of 2D platformers out there that don't have those problems. Conkers Bad Fur Day. I'm picturing this as being something like Banjo-Kazooie, except it's M-rated with all that entails. Plenty of swearing, probably some sexualization, maybe some drug usage, probably violence, and so on. Well, I've already talked about how I don't like Banjo-Kazooie, and I have to say combining it with South Park does not sound like it would improve the experience for me in the slightest. So as much as I'm sure fighting a giant singing mound of poop is the pinnacle of gaming, I'm gonna have to give this one a hard pass. Etrian Odyssey. I don't think the series is that well known, but they're first-person RPGs that are seemingly intended to mimic the gameplay as some of the earliest examples of the genre. You dive into a dungeon, fight monsters, bring back treasure, standard RPG stuff. While I like retro games as much as the next 90s and early 2000s kid, and I especially like modern games that apply modern design sensibilities and features to retro-style gameplay, but you know, there are certain gameplay styles that you don't see around much nowadays for a darn good reason. For starters, it's supposed to be pretty difficult, especially the original DS version. While that's not a deal-breaker in itself, I feel like difficulty in RPGs tends to be a lot more of a nuisance than it is in action games. When an RPG is difficult, it usually makes you have to deal with things like inadequate direction, RNG screw, and hour-long boss battles that set you back another 2 hours if you don't have a specific perfect strategy to avoid losing to them. But the difficulty isn't the problem per se, it's more that in combination with the utter lack of quality of life features or even much of any apparent advancements in the genre since the 80s, and arguably much even in the way of content or incentive to play the game. For me at least, the best RPGs have both a good story and good gameplay. Some of them can get away with skimping on one of those if the other one is good enough, but at minimum, an RPG should either have a good battle system and an inoffensive story, or a decent story and an inoffensive battle system. Etrian Odyssey has neither. The earlier games didn't have a story at all, and even the story mode in the remakes didn't have that much going on. The battle system, meanwhile, is about as standard turn-based RPG fare as you can get. Action commands, tactics, sheesh, you can't even see your character sprites. And the exploration is not interesting or engaging. The whole drawing your own map thing probably sounded like a good idea in theory, but in practice it just means you have to stop every 2 steps to mark things done on the touchscreen, and it makes the dungeons very square. Then, of course, there are the FOEs, extra powerful enemies that will absolutely wreck your crap if you get in a fight with them, so you have to carefully move around them and make sure that you finish any fights near them before they get the chance to join in, both of which are assuredly a pain in the game with random encounters. And if you die, you have to start back over in the town and hope that your next dungeon dive goes more smoothly, because you certainly can't save in the dungeons. Also, the boss, I only got far enough to fight one, takes forever and a day to kill, and it feels like you're all but guaranteed to run out of resources before it runs out of health, and just ARG! I even tried the game on easy mode because it was supposed to be ridiculously easy, and that barely even helped with the general impression. It made fights go noticeably quicker, but overall the game felt almost as tedious on easy as it did on normal. Supposedly the stark minimalism is because it's supposed to make you feel like you're creating your own adventure and coming up with your own story, which also explains the map drawing system, but I don't really think it works in the context of a video game, or at least not this one. If I want to play pretend, I'll invite my 6-year-old nephew over. That way I get to socialize, I'll probably get some exercise, I won't lose everything I've done due to one little mistake or even walking the wrong direction, and I'll probably have a heck of a lot more fun. Or I could do some creative writing or learn Game Maker. Honestly, if I really want to create my own adventure, there are so many better options for that. Like I said, Etrian Odyssey doesn't really have much going for it in terms of story, battle system, or overall design. I guess it's not a complete dud. I played through the demo of the Millennium Girl and actually bought the full version of the game, so it must at least have done something right. Maybe it was the skill tree system, that might have been the most interesting thing in the game. I just want to know one thing though. How in the flaming crap on a cracker did this series get 5 main entries and at least 2 crossover spin-offs when Radiant Historia has yet to get a single sequel despite being a much better game in every way? Yeah, I really have no incentive to play, let alone let's play this. I'm not even sure it would be interesting to watch me or anyone else play it. Maybe if they had a master's degree in comedy improv or something. For me, it just sounds like a waste of time. Shin Megami Tensei. I haven't played any games in this series, main or spin-off, and about the only one I'd ever even planned on playing was Persona 4. A friend of mine once said that Etrian Odyssey felt like a watered-down Shin Megami Tensei, which, given what I just said about that series, is not a superb endorsement for this one, but I don't know. These are also supposed to be pretty hard, especially the main series, and a lot of them are pretty freaking dark. Even the more light-hearted Persona games still have some mature content, which I don't know a lot about, aside from there being one demon that looks like a penis, but it's still a disincentive to playing them. Yeah, you know, after my experience playing Trails in the Sky on here, I feel like RPGs really need to make it worth my while for me to play them on the channel, and Shin Megami Tensei games just don't do that. A full playthrough of RollerCoaster Tycoon. I've already brought up RollerCoaster Tycoon on here previously. I rated it a 4, which is pretty good, but that was for playing it at all. Playing the entire game, well, that might be a problem. See, the thing is, the original RollerCoaster Tycoon has a lot of parks. In fact, the number of parks in the original scenario pack plus the 2 expansions is actually very close to the number of levels in Super Mario Bros. 3. But those levels are short. The average RollerCoaster Tycoon scenario probably takes about 3 hours to finish, give or take, and depending on how often you pause the game. And with 81 scenarios, yeah, you can do the math. You saw how long my Trails in the Sky LP took. Well, this game would make that one look practically ephemeral by comparison. I could play through all of the Mega Man Classic and X games in less time than it would take to play through just the original scenario pack. Heck, I started my current playthrough of this game back in April 2014, and I still haven't finished it. Granted, most of that time was spent on hiatus and or playing other games, but still, if I tried to play through every scenario beginning to end on camera, either the project would take a decade or I would have to gain some serious coping skills, because it wouldn't be a case of if burnout happened, but when, how frequently, and how severely. I definitely still want to play the game on the channel, I just don't want to play quite that much of it. Though now that I think about it, the game might make decent material for streaming if I ever get into that more. I haven't had great luck with it thus far, though. Super Smash Bros. This is one of those cases where I feel like my opinion on it has been soured somewhat by how overhyped it is. People treat announcements for new Smash characters with as much excitement as if they were new games, which just seems bizarre to me. Even outside of that, I don't like the games enough to do a playthrough of story mode, and I highly doubt I'm good enough at them anyway. I could maybe see this as a few short one-offs with friends, much like Mario Kart and Mario Party, but again, that requires actually having friends to do such a thing with. Cave Story. Another indie game that I don't know a lot about, but it seems like it was really popular circa 2008, kind of like Undertale before Undertale existed. There were a lot of ports from it in the SMW Central Music section too. I noticed that Roa Mithril once said that it had deceptively cute graphics with kind of a depressing story, which is a pretty significant turnoff in itself, but then it also had to go and be another Metroidvania. Complete no doubt with crypticness. How did this style of gameplay even become so popular? Seriously, I'm asking. How did a significant portion of gamers at one point go, you know, this game that has unique content for each new level is okay, I guess, but you know what would be even more fun? If we had to backtrack through every freaking area repeatedly. I don't know, maybe it's just me. I like games where I have a clear goal, a clear path to that goal, and no need to retread a bunch of old territory. Does that make me a filthy casual noob? Well, I've said for a while that I'm a casual player, so sue me. I'm an adult, I have things to do, video games are entertainment, not a major life skill to focus on, and every minute spent lost in a game just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, or scouring the area trying to find that one item that I missed, is a minute spent not making progress in another game. Or, you know, doing any number of other things that could enrich my life. It's not as if I hate all nonlinearity in video games. Yoshi's Island often had nonlinearity to it, and the more open area levels in Super Mario 3D World, like Sprawling Savannah and Peepa's Fogbog, I generally thought were pretty cool. Exploration can also be a fun and rewarding thing to have in a game when done properly. But boy, I feel like there are an awful lot of games that are ostensibly based on exploration, where much of the exploration is actually just busy work in disguise. And one of the worst things that a game can do is feel like busy work. See also any RPG with mandatory grinding. Like I said, video games are for entertainment, unless you're playing Wii Fit or something, I guess. If a game just feels like a job, except you're not getting paid, it's not a very good game, is it? And while we're on the subject of frustrating exploration and nonlinearity, let's discuss La-Mulana. I'm not actually sure if this is yet another Metroidvania, just a general action-adventure game, or what. It's another one that I'm not terribly familiar with, but what little I have heard about it is pretty much all red flags. It seems to be another retro-style game, though the original Japanese version first came out in 2005, before the retro indie trend really got started. As such, it seems to have all the frustrations that would be expected had it come out 2 decades earlier, and deliberately so at that. I read something about the designers intentionally making the learning curve steep to weed out the newbies, which is a big red flag. I like some of the genres and types of gameplay that were typical of retro video games, most notably 2D platformers. I do not like elements of gameplay that were common then but nowadays are considered unfair, or at least design flaws. Some people like the added challenge that comes from obtuseness and cheap shots. Frankly, they can keep it. As with Etrian Odyssey, as soon as you start talking about designing a game to appeal to the crowd who is used to the game design of the 80s and has come to expect it, I stop listening. Never trust a social Darwinist game developer. Or a social Darwinist anyone, really. And now for something completely different. I'm not really interested in playing Donkey Kong Country Returns in Tropical Freeze on Mirror Mode, or Hard Mode, whichever one they call it. Honestly, I don't see the point of its existence. It's the exact same levels except reversed horizontally and with no checkpoints or buddy barrels. Sounds thrilling, no? When I played the games normally, I did at least have some fun with the temple levels, despite their high difficulty, infuriating lack of checkpoints, and often lack of buddy barrels, but never at any point did I have the desire for the entire game to be like that. You want an actually decent hard mode? Play Mega Man 10. You want an even better one? Play Copy Kitty. You want an utterly garbage tier hard mode? Folks, may I direct your attention to Donkey Kong Country. It's amazing how even the best game in the world can become an absolute pain in the butt once you add challenge stipulations to it. Nefarious. I think I first heard of this game when Matthew Toronto, of Brawl in the Family fame, promoted it. In this game, you're the bad guy who's kidnapping princesses and stuff, kind of like if in Super Mario Bros. You played as Bowser instead of Mario. The basic concept is novel, if nothing else, but it's also really off-putting to me. Why would I want to play as the villain? It may be more lighthearted than something like, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto or another mature game when you're playing as a criminal, but you know, playing a Mario game as Bowser never appealed to me. Bowser's inside story aside, I guess, and neither does this. I don't want to be the bad guy. About the baddest that I'm willing to go is like an anti-hero who's willing to kill people who are evil rather than just letting them escape. A straight-up card-carrying villain, quirky or not, nope, not interested, sorry. Pier Solar. This is an RPG that was actually originally made as a Genesis homebrew game in 2010 and later ported to other platforms, and it's supposedly pretty terrible. Cody Kitty, one of my favorite online reviewers, whose name has come up a few times already, absolutely eviscerated this game on her site and considers it probably her least favorite video game that she's ever played. From how she describes it, it sounds like it has all the problems of the typical RPG made in the early 90s, but it's even more annoying and tedious due to being made by incompetent and self-important developers. The only real reason I'd play this and comment on it would be to mock it and show off how bad it is. If I were to play it unironically, well, like I've said before, I might as well play something of better quality. Dark Souls. Another one where there are plenty of reasons why I wouldn't want to play it, but the reasons why I would want to play it are few. It's violent, dark, difficult, And yet, I still can't quite give it a 10 because I was willing to try playing it. I didn't do so for long, pretty much just enough to create a character and feel bad about smashing somebody's cart that was just sitting there to get an item behind it, but a non-zero amount of time. My brother wanted me to try it because he'd heard of the game's reputation for being pretty dang hard and thought that, given my past experience, I could handle the difficulty and the intricacies of combat. Thing is, he missed one very important point about the game when recommending it to me. It's 3D. I may be pretty decent at playing a number of challenging 2D platformers in action games like Mega Man and Donkey Kong, but that skill very pointedly does not extend to 3D games. And even if that weren't the case, I feel like the general atmosphere makes it pretty tough to have any investment in it. As far as I can tell, there is no hope in this world, no happy ending, no heroes to vanquish evil and make the world a better place. I mean, the game is called Dark Souls. That doesn't exactly bring to mind a setting where love and friendship will win. Honestly, I don't know why my brother suggested I play it, since it has basically nothing in common with any game that I've ever played and liked in my entire life, but it's there for those who enjoy it, just not for me. Plants vs. Zombies 2. I actually could have sworn that I brought this up already, but apparently I didn't. In any case, this game was something of a letdown, though it was still less disappointing than the new Crash Bandicoot 4. You know, if I had a nickel for every video game that was a modern sequel to a game I liked previously, had It's About Time as a subtitle, and should have been really cool but turned out to be more frustrating than fun and highly disappointed me as a result, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? Anyway, the game still plays much like the original Plants vs. Zombies. Zombies attack you use plants to tower defense their butts into no longer being a threat. But I feel like this game took a lot of pretty cool new plant and zombie types and some neat environments and squandered them on a base game that's actually kind of annoying. The difficulty ramps up way faster than it does in the first game, with few easily accessible tools to handle it and many ways to screw up, and quite often you run into levels with gimmicks that seem to serve no purpose other than being obnoxious. Don't plant on the back 2 rows, don't have more than 14 plants, don't plant on the back 2 rows or have more than 14 plants, don't let the zombies progress beyond column 6, don't let them eat this specific plant, blah. They might have been more excusable if they were one-offs or part of a separate gameplay mode, but the game throws them at you constantly. Also, story mode seems to be the only gameplay style, there are no additional ones like the first game had. Though I guess to some extent, some of what probably would have been mini-games, like the matching puzzles with the camel zombies, just ended up in story mode. Story mode goes on way too long, too. The original game's story mode had 5 worlds and 10 levels per world for a total of 50 levels, and last I knew, this game had both longer and more numerous worlds, probably working out to at least 200 total. More content is normally a good thing, but I felt like this was a case of more levels not actually feeling like more content and more just coming off as padding, unless newer versions of the game are different. Also, it's a mobile game. Why they thought it would be a good idea to put the sequel to a PC game exclusively on phones, I don't know, but I hate it. And being a mobile game, it follows the typical toxic business model of one. While it's free to play, there are some plants and other things that you have to pay for. And they seem to have designed the game assuming that the player is stupid enough, assuming that the player will partake in some of these microtransactions to alleviate some of the challenge. And of course, to record a phone game, I'd probably have to use an emulator like BlueStacks or something. Even if I did have an altered version that was perfectly playable on the PC and had all the pay-to-win bullcrap gone, and I doubt there's anyone with those skills who cares enough about this game to make such a thing and risk getting sued, it would still be a tall order due to the monotony of its design that I mentioned. The game is still too long for the amount of unique content it has to remain interesting, and the gimmick levels are awful. Basically, Plants vs. Zombies 2 has more obstacles to getting a playthrough on my channel than a quadruple amputee delivering pizza to the top of Kilauea on a unicycle. And about the only thing that stops it from being a 10 is that I don't inherently dislike the game. Even though I give it a lot of crap, there was at the very least potential for it to be good, but there's just no getting around the fact that they took a game that was pretty fun and made a sequel that's significantly less fun, is exclusive to mobile devices, and has microtransactions. If this is what EA does to games after getting a hold of them, I can see why people hate them so much. And you know what, for that matter, let's just throw mobile games in general in here. Even now that I have a smartphone and occasionally play games on it, I still think phones suck as gaming devices. I hate their controls for the overwhelming majority of genres, I loathe their business model, and I hardly even like being reminded that they exist. Seriously, when I hear about developers switching entirely to mobile, my first thought is usually something like, well, guess they'll never see another cent from me. The controls all come down to being dependent on a touchscreen, a piece of technology that I very much disagree with the majority on about how important an advancement it is. I honestly don't even like using a touchscreen for actual phone things like text messaging. Literally the only reason I didn't get a phone with a physical keyboard back in 2018 is that it was $200 more expensive. Using one for video games seems much worse. If a game can be played with just a mouse and one button without anyone thinking the controls could be better, it could work on a phone. If that's not true, it would probably suck on a phone. Bejeweled, for instance, would be just fine, as would Plants vs. Zombies. Something like Mega Man or Crash Bandicoot, on the other hand, would be a nightmare. I recall that they actually have made Mega Man and Crash games for phones, but I am very doubtful that any of them are actually good. Meanwhile, the prevailing business model for mobile games seems to be to make the game free, but have microtransactions that improve aspects of the game or make it easier, then make it so annoying to progress without them that you're suckered into paying for them. Or occasionally make the game completely free but stuffed with ads, as if there are people out there saying, you know, I was going to buy this product, but this other one had an ad in one of my phone games that reminded me it exists, so I think I'll buy that one. I do still play a few of those shallow phone games. They make decent entertainment when you're on the toilet or in a waiting room, but honestly I'd rather pay for them up front like I do with every other video game platform. Yes, even the ones that are currently free, assuming they got rid of the ads and junk. And when someone as anti-capitalist as me says they'd rather buy something than get it for free, there's something screwy going on. I'd be willing to pay for things like wordscapes and word stacks. Heck, I'd pay the Toy Blast people a few bucks if it meant that Amy would quit nagging me about being out of lives and I could just go as long as I wanted, and that still wouldn't make it more than about a 2 or 3 out of 5 game. Rate your RNG Fest 5 stars? I darn well don't think so. How about you try making a game that's actually worthy of 5 stars? I wouldn't be surprised if there are at least some mobile games that are actually decent, but it seems like the options would be extremely limited. Video games were never meant to be played on cell phones, science has gone too far. And again, I'd probably have to find a way to emulate them, so it hardly seems worth it. I'm probably not interested in playing any sports games either. They're fine for people who like them, but I'm just not into them. They probably wouldn't make very good Let's Plays anyway. I also very much doubt I'd want to play any dating sims. Even on the off chance that I find one that's family-friendly and is actually written well, I'm pretty ace and pretty neurodivergent, and they kind of just sound like one big awkward moment. These could very well be a 10, but I just don't know much about them, and frankly I don't really care to learn. Finally, any and all online multiplayer games are most likely a no-go. These might also be a 10, maybe a 9.5, I don't know. Playing with strangers pretty much takes all the fun out of multiplayer games if you ask me, and as I've said before, getting friends together to do it is tricky. Also, the Venn diagram of genres that I like and genres that lend themselves well to online multiplayer is pretty much a figure 8. Or even just individual games. I think my options are basically Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, which I mentioned during the Level 7 discussion, and Worms, which I've watched other videos of and which could be entertaining. That's it, that's the entire list. I'm not into MMOs, nor am I into PvP shooters or real-time strategy games. I don't even think most of the other multiplayer games I've mentioned on here can be played online. With that, we're done here. We're almost to the top of the scale, or the bottom, depending on how you look at it. Honestly, I should have just made the scale go the normal direction and not based it on anything specific, since most people would probably have found that more intuitive. But I suppose it's too late now, at least for this video series. Join me next time when we discuss the worst of the worst, at least in terms of personal interest.